Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well. It's Lane here with MetaShackle. Today we're going to be going over the XRP charts, and as you probably already know, we had quite the flash crash last night, which almost certainly liquidated the vast majority of the leveraged long positions in the market, which certainly wasn't by mistake. They often do this intentionally to gather additional liquidity to fill large positions while creating fear in the market for most of the retail traders, which seems to be exactly what they have accomplished. But this move to the downside isn't necessarily complete. And with what we saw last night, it's making it very hard to get a good read on the current chart. So let's not waste any more time and let's get into the charts. For additional information and exclusive perks, do consider joining me and the rest of our community on Patreon. So if you haven't been following my videos, what we've been seeing in XRP is what's known as a dragon pattern, forming its head here with the front feet here, the hump moving into the rear feet, with the tail moving outside of the descending wedge pattern. What we're currently seeing in XRP is a 5-wave Elliott Wave move to the upside, as you can see here, starting from this point right here. Now, if we remove everything from the chart, you can see that even with this liquidation last night coming off of this wave 1 termination right here, this 5-wave Elliott Wave move to the upside still has not been invalidated and is still currently in play, although it would not take much more for the price to move down to enter into the wave 1 termination, which would technically invalidate this 5-wave move to the upside according to the Elliott Wave unbreakable rule set. So that's definitely something that we're going to want to keep an eye on moving forward. But with the move that we saw last night with this liquidation candle coming to the downside, it swept a decent amount of liquidity from this entire pattern. Although this candle here had swept this portion, there was a lot of liquidity resting right along this area here that has all been swept moving to this downside. But there is still quite a bit of liquidity remaining to the downside that we need to be cautious about. As I often say, nothing in trading is 100%, and there's no guarantee whatsoever that this dragon pattern is going to continue breaking out to the upside. But it's not uncommon to see a false breakout in this area here moving to the downside before seeing the breakout to the upside. Here's an example right here that's very similar to what we're currently seeing, with this breakout of the tail coming out above the upper trend line, breaking to the downside before having the big move to the upside, with the main difference being this move to the downside did not sweep the lower liquidity like we've seen until after this big move had already been made, with the liquidation being right here. Here's another example, with the head being here, the front feet, the hump, the rear feet. Price moved down right here, sweeping this lower liquidity before moving to the upside. And a third example here, with the rear feet being in this area, price breaking out, not making it quite above the upper trend line, but coming back with a big liquidation to the downside before seeing the move to the upside forming the tail. So this does occur quite often. But as I said, is no guarantee that it's going to continue to play out to the upside. But right now, the pattern is still valid. Now, before this liquidation occurred last night, the wave 4 termination was resting right here. But since this has swept the liquidity from the whole pattern, the wave 4 termination as it stands right now would be resting right here. If we go into a smaller time frame, taking a look at the hourly, we can see that we have formed a fair value gap right here in this area, but it doesn't look like it's going to hold. As price has come down and filled this, price very well could break right through to the downside on this pattern and continue. Because with this wave C termination that we've seen right here on this pattern that I've been talking about, which ended up actually being an extended wave C rather than up in this territory here, which I was initially looking at. The wave C extension has brought this down into this area here, which means that if we are going to see a 5-wave move to the upside for the primary 5th, this very well could be starting to build that wave 1 into a wave 2, which we would have to watch to see. But if this price comes down and takes out this previous low, then we know this is not a wave 1 and a wave 2 for that move. The only unfortunate thing about this is it's very hard to trade this, because if this does come down and take out this previous low, by the time you realize this is not a wave 1 and a wave 2, you've already been wiped out of your position. So if you're planning to trade this, I would be very careful in this area. I was chatting with some of the members on my Patreon last night as this crash was occurring, and I actually entered a long position here, which I'm still currently holding, which is still in the profit, but I'm not going to be adding to it, and I've moved my stop loss up above my initial entry, so at this point I can't lose money even if the market moves to the downside. But there is still quite a bit of liquidity remaining below current price that likely looks very appealing to the market makers and to the people who are responsible for causing this crash in the first place. So that's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. Now, when we take a look at the XRP Exchange Liquidation Map, we can see here on the 30-day that even though we had that incredible swing to the downside last night, that there still remains quite a bit of liquidity below current price, coming down here all the way to about that 250 range for the biggest portion, which is shown on this particular map. There is quite a bit of liquidity to the upside above current price, but with price already being down in this area, it would be more likely, if this was going to be taken, that it would be taken now while the price is at lower ranges. So we definitely want to be cautious of this, because this move to the downside might not be over with, and it's something we need to keep an eye on. And coming over and looking at the 3-month XRP liquidation heat map, we can see that even though we did have that big move to the downside, there is quite a bit of liquidity resting right down in that area. And if we come down even lower, down here into the 230s, into the 220s, there's also a very large amount of liquidity resting down in this area. And as unlikely as it might seem right now, never underestimate the power of the market maker to make your life a living hell, because these people have so much money involved. They can basically take the price wherever they want, and if they want to take this lower liquidity, they absolutely will. And as I often say, nothing in trading is 100%. So even though we have this beautiful dragon pattern on the XRP chart right now, there's absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that it's going to play out to the upside. And if this pattern does break down to the downside, we need to be prepared for that. And another thing that I often say is that fear is a much more powerful emotion than greed. Greed will only take you so far, but if you instill enough fear in someone, they will scratch, kick, and claw their way to try and get out of that situation. And with all of the fear that they're putting in the market right now, we need to be very cautious, because it very well could turn into a cascade to the downside that is just unstoppable. And once it started moving even further to the downside, the fear will continue to stack and stack, taking out stop losses, liquidations, and just building momentum to the downside like a snowball rolling down a hill, gaining mass, gaining momentum, gaining speed. So if you're a trader, this is something you're definitely going to want to be cautious of. But regardless if you're just a trader, a day trader, a swing trader, or a long-term investor, this could present quite a good opportunity for you if it does move to this downside, regardless or not if the dragon pattern ends up playing out to the upside right now. Because there's a reason why they take all of that lower liquidity, and they wouldn't be going through the trouble of rounding it all up if there wasn't potential for a move to the upside. But in order for that to occur, there could be a substantial move to the downside previous to that move to the upside. That's something we need to keep an eye on. We can see right here, just as I've been making this video, the price has actually broken through this fair value gap to the downside. So there is a very good chance that we could see this continue downward. So what I would be watching for is this to be potentially a wave 1 down to a wave 2. And if that's the case, we don't want to see it take out this previous low right here. But there is a little bitty glimmer of hope right here on the daily chart, because if you look at this here, you can see that we do have a very small bullish divergence forming right here between the indicator and the current price. But it would not take much for this indicator to move to the downside to negate this. Basically, all we would have to see is this point right here dropping below this point right here to negate that bullish divergence. So I certainly would not count on this, but as it stands at the time of making this video, it is a potential divergence, albeit not a very strong one at this point. So that's basically what I'd be watching for right here, is to see if price continues to move to the downside. We don't want to see it take out this lower termination point of this liquidation candle, and we definitely don't want to see it take out the wave 1 termination resting right here at about that $2.65 range, because doing so could negate the entire 5-wave move to the upside. And if you're trying to put on a long position here, it could be very painful and could wipe you out of your position very quickly in order to find this out. So you don't want to learn the hard way. So be very cautious with your trading. And this might just be one of those times where you want to sit back and watch, just waiting from the sidelines, reducing your risk and protecting your capital. And if you do decide to enter a trade to the long side, wait for a bottom to come in and then enter on the retest of a fair value gap or something of that sort. But certainly don't try to jump in front of a moving train, because with all the liquidity resting below this pattern here, we could see this come to much, much lower prices if the market makers decide they want to push this down. So please protect your capital. Don't try to make the move. Wait for the move to come to you. And another metric that I often use and which I demonstrate on this channel is measuring out the potential lows by coming from this point here, using the candle that breaks through the pattern at your 50% mark to help you gauge where the downside could be, which in this case would put us right around that $2.17, $2.18 range, which goes along with what we were just looking at in the liquidation heat map as well. So even though this pattern has been beautiful, we've been watching it for quite some time, the 5-wave Elliott move to the upside is still in play. I'd say it's about a coin flip right now on whether or not this pattern could break to the downside or could break out to the upside. So for me right now, I'll basically just be sitting back and watching. And we'll have to see how this turns out and how it goes. But for the time being, we know what to watch for. I certainly don't give financial advice on this channel, but for me personally, I will be sitting back with my money on the sidelines, watching to see how this plays out. And with the current long position that I have, I can't lose money on it, so I'll let it basically just play out and see what happens. If it stops me out, it stops me out. If it moves to the upside, hits my limit sell order, that's fine too. But as it sits right now, I'm not willing to risk any capital on any additional trades. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Good luck and have a great day.